Everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraquah, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Now, it's no secret that human resources has long been undervalued as a strategic partner in business growth. HR is often overlooked, and as HR professionals, we are regularly having to vie for a seat at the table, or as the saying goes, bring a folding chair. But back in 2017, today's Project HR guest, Perry Timms, proposed a fix for this problem, which was less image makeover and more disruptive and unlocking of HR's potential to become a true powerhouse for organizational success. Perry's book, aptly titled Transformational HR: How Human Resources Can Create Value and Impact Business Strategy, caused quite a stir in the industry. You may actually remember it as it was an Amazon.com top 30 HR seller after its release, and it made Book Authority's top 100 strategy books of all time. And now I'm so excited because the second edition of Transformational HR was just released, and Perry is here with me today to bring us all up to speed. Perry, I'm so happy you're here with me today on Project HR.
It's a genuine pleasure, Jennifer. Thank you for the introduction.
So let's talk about Transformational HR. What were your thoughts on its reception in our industry when it was first released?
Well, it was my first book, and it was one of those things where I think you kind of bare your soul to the world. So I kind of had a tentative feel about it. It was like, well, what if I've got it wrong? What if I'm putting out things to the world that the rest of the world says, what's that all about? But actually, the reception was the opposite. I think it was timely in a number of ways, but I've been, I suppose, appreciative of the fact that people went, hey, you are not throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. What you're doing is looking at the story of HR to now and its potential that's untapped. So I think it got a good reception. I've worked with a number of companies who have been inspired by it in total or in part. And so I reckon there's about at least 30 companies I know who have adopted the majority of the principles in the book. One in particular is an 11,000 strong Northern European consulting organisation, and she willingly tells the tale that she remodeled the entire HR function based on the book. So that really pleased me.
Yeah, having that kind of impact is amazing. So when I listen to your TED Talks and I study your thoughts on the future of work, it's clear that you believe that HR really needs to reshape itself. Now, why did we need to do this back in 2017 when you first wrote the book, and how has that need changed in the years since?
Absolutely right on that. So given the opportunity to write the book, I guess was a time where we were talking about the future of work quite actively, from a sense that we could see the writing on the wall about digital technology changing lives and work quite considerably. But also, I think there were a number of organizations who had thrown away the orthodox playbook. And by that, I mean largely the technology industry, which suddenly became the most valuable companies in the world, displacing organizations that had been there for decades. So I guess we could see that there was some disruption. Yet when I looked at HR's construct and its model, it was about 20 years old from when Dave Ulrich came up with the business partner three-legged stool kind of concept. And I thought 20 years ago was the last time we really looked at the model of HR. What are we doing? So I guess it was that. It was almost that kind of catalytic thought that now's the time, really, 2 decades from that. Have we really grasped the value that HR could create and the influence it could have? And I kept coming back to the answer, no. So I thought, well, now's a chance to see if we can transform it and therefore its impact on the world of work and create a sense that people and what they do can be more aligned and there's more fulfillment and satisfaction. We were in a position, I think, where lots and lots of people were questioning the nature of their work, thinking, okay, I get a paycheck, but I'm tired, I'm unfulfilled. This is not how it's supposed to be.
With the factors that have impacted this thinking kind of in mind, what's your vision for the role of HR? As you know, as this is a business function that we've got to move into the future, like you said, it's been 20 years since we looked at it, so we're turning it on its head and looking at it. So what's your vision for the role of HR?
So I think what's happened in the world of work and business is, I suppose, the obsession with continued sort of profiteering. So if we look at the sort of quarterly returns and the shareholder pressures, and whether that's shareholders or investors, it has all been about stacking up capital and creating worth in a sort of investing sense, at the sacrifice, I think, of the people who create that value. So they're considered parts of machinery, commodities, and replaceable units, when actually what happens in the more successful companies who have sustained good progress, I suppose you'd say, it's built off the back of their creativity, their commitment, their dedication, their loyalty, their togetherness, all these intangible factors that don't appear on any scorecard. So
Mm.
therefore, I see HR's role no longer as administrating a people function, but making a very explicit connection, whether it's causal or a correlation, to people having that direct value impact on organizations, so that we can start to bring to the fore, I suppose, that uniqueness that we all have when we're in a place that values us and we can do our best work. So more agitating, more stewarding of fairness and ethics, more about the untapped potential in people. And so going away from just looking at spreadsheets with attrition and loss to looking at the conditions that have created a discourse within people that force them to go elsewhere, and the cost and implication to that. So yeah, much more about stewarding, strategic influence, at the heart of it, really humanly ways of working.
Mm, fascinating. And so, for anyone listening who might not be familiar, your approach uses some innovative methodologies, things that really aren't thought of in relation to human resources. How do you make things like Lean UX Agile? How do those work for HR?
So I guess when I look at HR as a service provider inside an organizational construct, then really what it's been doing, I think, is creating bureaucracies and trying to create some kind of sense of certainty for managers who are not wanting to deal with the ambiguity and the sort of volatility of people and their moods and their needs and changing demands. So it's tried to create a very sort of sterile place to be, when in
Hmm.
fact it should channel the energies of difference and creativity. And I see that in the technology world. So things like lean UX and the whole concept really of iterative and adaptive change built from people's needs and changing demands just felt right for
Mm.
HR to kind of rewrite its playbook. So I think I did learn a lot from working in technology myself, actually, about the construct of projects and the nature of sort of task and product based approaches. And I just thought HR delivers products. It doesn't develop an apprenticeship scheme in a vacuum. It's a product that people consume. And I guess I
Mm.
use the frame, if people had to pay for that service, would they pay for it? And at the moment, they would just say it's a tolerated necessity rather than an
Hmm.
added value product. So I wanted to change our way of thinking about what we do as service to the rest of the people in the organization.
And in the book, you support a shift to what you call the four zones model for
Yeah.
transformational HR. Can you detail that model for us a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And so it was something again when when I looked at the work of Dave Ulrich, I thought, well, this guy took us in the 1990s from a place where we were personnel and we were just massively bureaucratic, to at least trying to understand what the business was there to do, understand P&L and so on. So I didn't want to throw that away, but I thought it just didn't feel nimble enough for the
Mm.
dynamic world that we're now in. So four zones was a way of respecting the sort of heritage, if you want, of those three distinct areas of shared service, centre of excellence, and business partnering, but giving them a modern twist and giving them much more pliability. I saw a lot in HR teams where those distinct functions didn't even interoperate within HR that well, let alone with the rest of the business.
Mhm.
So I wanted to create some intersectionality and some crossovers, that people shared things like equity, diversity, and inclusion agendas. They weren't just a role in the team, it was a completely shared responsibility, but with strong accountability, perhaps to the CHRO and to people in a strategic role. And that made me think of some of the problems that I've seen in HR teams that I've worked with, both in house and as a consulting advisor, in that they're really, really busy doing the day job. And then they get expected to transform their function and something to do with the business at the same time. So
Mm.
I wanted to
Right.
create a separation. Yeah. It just didn't seem fair to have a multi layered change program and business as usual being done by the same teams.
Mhm.
So I created this fourth zone, which was about organizational and people transformation, to give people a chance to detach, really vacuum pack themselves in transformative work, deliver that, and then go back into the sort of professional discipline that they were probably more aligned to in the first place. And that's the whole agility and nimbleness that I think we really, really needed something, and was behind my thinking of creating four zones.
So I would definitely say that one of the most challenging aspect of any disruptive initiative is paying attention to the hearts and minds of the people, even while you're addressing those more tangible elements of the movement. Have you experienced any resistance to the ideas in your book and winning over hearts and minds?
It's an interesting one because I guess I wanted to come at this from a fairly modest perspective, really, is that, I wasn't about to create so much discomfort that people would easily be able to swipe it away. So, in answer to the question directly, no, I haven't come across much resistance. I've come
Hmm.
across curiosity, and I've come across a little bit of uncertainty, I suppose, about what difference it actually would make. And so maybe it wasn't distinct enough that people could see that detachment. But I think that gave me almost like a Trojan horse type of opportunity, because the curiosity then got me into conversations with HR directors and CHROs who would then say, so the shift I need to make is not so radical, but actually it is incremental and it is experimental, but it's something I can adjust to a timing and a context that suits me. And that's where I think I got comfort, that people
Hmm.
didn't feel like they had to, almost put people through the pain of something huge and convulsive, that it would be more gradual and it would be more
Hmm.
iterative and it would be more aligned, I guess, to business need. So that's
Hmm.
perhaps why I haven't had much resistance.
Sure. It gives them something they can kind of wrap their arms around and go after.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. We're going to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but I can't wait to talk about what's in this new edition of Transformational HR when we come back. So stay with us.
Are you working to build an employee relations dream team? I've got an in-depth guide that provides the same roadmap used by employers of choice across the country. It reveals the 3 functional areas you must address before you begin building your dream team, gives you detailed job descriptions, and key performance indicators that will make your team a trusted part of top management. Get inspired and meet the needs of your company with this masterful guide to building your employee relations dream team. Download it at unionproof.com/build an employee relations dream team.
I'm back with Perry Timms, founder and chief energy officer for People and Transformational HR Limited, and of course, the author of Transformational HR. So, as I mentioned, the second edition of Transformational HR, How Human Resources Can Create Value and Impact Business Strategy, was released recently. Perry, can you tell me a little bit about what's in this new edition?
Yeah, for sure. Of course, the first thing I had to do in 2020 when being invited to put this together was just look at the world that we were in, which was incredibly early into the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic. So clearly, we'd seen an enormous amount of disruption. Terms like furlough, which we'd never had to use before in the world of work, but also that sort of mass dispersal of people who could in knowledge-based work, work from home, and HR's response. And I was very, very close to a number of my professional colleagues during the early days of the COVID responses. Was really strong, very certain in certain times. Was they were burning hours like I don't believe, because they were really supporting people's shifts,
Mm-hmm.
isolation, safety, all those things. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to contextualize it to that, because HR in the past was probably a little bit tolerated, and then all of a sudden during the pandemic, boards and executives were turning to HR going, what do we do? They really didn't have a clue. And HR had to stand very strong in that space and go, hey, here's the legal bits, here's the moral bits, here's the functional business continuity bits,
Mm-hmm.
and really had to drive that change overnight in many respects. So I wanted to reflect that. So that's in there. I also used it as an opportunity to reflect on some of the companies that I talked about in the earlier section who have adopted some of these practices. So there's 5 new case studies that talk about different levels and scales of adoption of some of the techniques within the book. And so it talks about the method they used and the outcomes and the impact they had. But I also used it to bring what I can only describe as like a people experience model into the book as well, to give people something about how do I socialize the shifts I want to make in the way I want to have people think about HR's role and its services and products and deliverables. So that's in there too. So there's a new model there that has the end outcome of a flourishing organization and flourishing people. So that's the real sense of how this stuff is working, when you can track activities and sentiment that shows you both the organization and its people are flourishing. So I've brought those into the mix as well. So it's got probably about 15 or 20% of its content is new and refreshed.
Oh, all right. And like you said, I want to dig in a little bit on those case studies. You here to drop any
Sure.
names or maybe share a case study that would intrigue our audience?
Yeah, for sure. One that really stands out was about 6 months after the book was released, and I was given a talk about the sort of need for agility more in HR to a group of local government HR professionals. So they're doing sort of local council work, anything from street cleaning and refuse collection through to child protection and so on. And she came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, we've got a digital agenda within the organisation to create more customer-based digital services, but we can't get them out of the sort of design stage well enough that we can launch them. And we just saw something in what you've just described as helping us do that. Can you help us build it?" So I did. I went in and worked with their sort of current agenda, and I started to introduce some of the principles, I suppose, that are in this book about liberating people to work on things where they've got a real passion and intent to solve problems and create new products and services, and a sort of an architecture around it about how people are selected, how they get the time to do it, creating the space, the support, the learning. And so they adopted that, and I spent best part of about 4 to 6 weeks on and off with about 100 people. We got them skilled into a certain type of method. So really, it was kind of a hack into their org design. It was quite a big departure for them. I then left them to their own devices and found out that 6 months later, they'd launched 8 new digital products and became Digital Council of the Year in the UK. So their outcome was terrific. And it's rewired how HR works. It's so responsive. It is much more about fluid, inclusive engagement with people. So they've loosened a lot of the bureaucracy, I guess you'd say the rigidity and the limitations of job roles and where people are based into a much more sort of hive mind and swarms of problem-solving teams. So that's probably my sort of strongest example of how people took this book in principle and really adapted their HR approach to be that kind of dynamic problem-solving entity.
Well, and as you mentioned, you were working on this in 2020 when not just HR, but the whole world was disrupted.
Yeah.
How did the pandemic and all that it brought sort of impact your views on the future of work?
Yeah, I mean, it did a lot because I suppose we all suddenly had to create much more digital connectivity and therefore digital capability. And so one of the things I saw was people trying to almost over-engineer serendipity and contact and meetings and connections to people to sort of check in on them and perhaps even check up on them. And I just saw what this was doing to people. It was tiring them out. It was blocking their day. They couldn't actually get any work done. So it forced me to kind of go back to the book and think, well, what in these principles that I set out 4 years before this have actually now come to some shape or form in this new world we're in, and sort of sense check them. And actually, what I saw was that enormous lack of, I suppose you'd say, rigidity and attachment to a core role, but a real sense of what's the problem to solve, who do I need, how quickly can I get there, what's the safe and most governance-friendly way of doing some of this. And I thought, yeah, all the spirit of everything I put in this book is now manifesting in the way HR has kind of rubbed out its own lines and created something very much more adaptable. So I felt really comforted by that. And I think some of the other elements about how you kind of vacuum pack yourself to do something transformative and park your business as usual activities for a while, I saw people having to do that. In order to create a kind of temporary workforce based from home, people, just dropped stuff and got on with that, fixed that, and then went back to the other stuff. So it proved it can be done. So, yeah, I think from that, I took a great deal of comfort that whilst I didn't predict it for a pandemic, it was a manifestation of everything I believed in and suggested, wrapped into this kind of chaos and crisis management response.
Yeah. Well, and on Project HR, we've had a bit of a recurring theme here. Like all the upheaval of the last 18 months has allowed us to really step back and look at the ways in which we work. So I'm wondering your thoughts. Should HR professionals have a sense of urgency, do you think, in making the kind of changes you're suggesting while workplaces are building back? Is this sort of a perfect storm, an opportunity?
I mean, the phrase perfect storm is exactly how I've described it, Jennifer. So yes is the short answer to it. And again, there's a couple of reasons why I think it's right to not kind of take your foot off the gas and try and go back to a sense of what was before, because I think so much has changed attitudinally, people's perspectives on working flexibly, and so on and so forth. So what I've done recently is I've researched about 30 or 40 thought leadership pieces, research pieces, and so on about the future of HR. And they all kind of point to the same direction, which is now is the chance for HR to go, right, we proved ourselves at a time of crisis. Now we're in a strategically uncertain area. We can continue to do that, but you being the sort of the business that I'm in has got to give us the space to do that. You've got to listen to us, you've got to work with us, you've got to take our advice. So I think we can be a little bit more bullish. I think we can be a little bit more intentional, and I think we've got the capability. My only concern is that we're exhausted from what we've just done for the last 18 months.
Yep,
so
sure.
be fair to ourselves. Yeah. So what I've urged people to do is what I said in this book, which is like to transform your business, transform HR first, get HR absolutely tuned to being almost the radical outlier in the company, and then use some of that principle to help you radically transform the way the rest of the business works. So yeah, my urge is to look after ourselves, to remodel ourselves, and then really get into the conversations that say, right, business, now we know we can steward this, guide this, and help you get to a point where your business is quite literally reinvented.
I love that idea of HR as the radical outlier. So
Yeah.
I definitely want to dig into that. All right, Perry, I've got to take time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Perry Timms, founder and chief energy officer for People and Transformational HR Limited and author of Transformational HR. And we are back. So, Perry, the ideas in your book are aspirational. And while certainly some of the bigger picture ideas need to be led by the C-suite, what actions could any HR professional take to transform the impact of HR's role in their organization?
That's a super question, and actually one that I did get asked quite a lot, actually, which is where the appetite perhaps for radical change needs to be somewhat tempered with smaller iterations. So I often even encourage this, and you used a crucial word, which is impact. So one of the things I think professionals can do at a sort of an individual or a slightly more sort of team level is start thinking, hang on a minute, what is the impact of the work that we do? And I think by that, I don't just mean how quickly do we process requests, but what is the impact and the value we create in our advice and our guidance and our learning programs and so on, beyond simple speed and financial prudence, let's say. So what does it mean to human beings? How does it make them feel? What's different in our post-intervention kind of people? Do they feel more settled, inspired, motivated, guided, confident, enabled? And so those things, human, social, intellectual value, I think we can start looking at those and go, what do I do at an individual level or the team of people very near to me that hits those kinds of parameters? So that's the first thing I'd say, is really impact assess your own work. And then in the book, I've got a fairly sort of radical example of a tech company that work in pairs. So what effectively they do is they pool their workload from individual portfolios to this shared portfolio. And I've advocated that HR could do with some of that, whether it's a recruitment administrator and a headhunter type sourcer within an organization who don't have two distinct workloads, but just share. So the headhunter might do a bit of admin, but the admin person might do a little bit of contacting and querying people for availability for posts. Because it's great to sort of share that discipline, build your bench strength, test people out in a comforting way. It just creates more portability and pliability. And I think it stops us having to, be real solo players feeling almost undernourished by recognition and feedback. So you could work in pairs. And those are just a couple of examples, really, the impact side of things and working in pairs that I think there's probably nothing stopping them from doing that.
Yeah, and I love those examples. Those are, easily implemented ways of looking at it and making that model work. I mentioned your company earlier, but you and I haven't really talked about it in any detail, so I want to remedy that. Can you tell me a little bit about People and Transformational HR Limited?
Can indeed. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we're just about to start year 10. So for a number of years, it was just me. And that was kind of deliberate because I guess I wanted to see my place in the market as a consulting advisor. And then when I wrote the first edition, interest started to increase. And I thought, I'm going to have to bring some people with me. So I've created a team now. So there's 12 of us. Lots of the team are working parents, so we work incredibly flexibly.
Mm.
We're a 4-day operating week organisation, so we have every Wednesday in the week where we don't work. And partly that was because we were pretty flat out and pretty exhausted by tending the shifts, 5 continuous days or whatever. So we deliberately put a punctuation in there so that we didn't have to work on a Wednesday. And so, yeah, those kinds of things we can be quite radical with. Essentially, we do a lot of work around organisation design, change, performance. So on the HR side of things, we're not necessarily in there to work out sort of comp and ben strategies and so on, but we do a lot around responsiveness, adaptability, performance, and fulfillment in work. So yeah, lots of learning is involved in that.
And I know you offer labs. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, labs, right. So again, during COVID, what we were looking at was how we used to consult, which was that a company would invite us in, we'd go on their premises, we would work with their teams, we would run workshops in rooms, and of course that wasn't available. And so we started to think about a digital first offer. And we thought, actually, the benefit really comes when we don't just theoretically sort of work through a concept, but we bring a real problem into a room and we work through it. So it felt more like an experimental lab. And we just thought, hey, instead of running online workshops, why don't we run virtual labs? Real work, people learning a methodology, coming out with an outcome at the end of it. And we looked at the areas that we consulted in and broke them down into 9 areas initially. It was things like design thinking, impact mapping, agility, team-based concepts. And we designed them in June and July and we launched them. And I think actually we're on our busiest spell ever because I think people quite like these smaller 3-hour bursts of an immersive simulator. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm even wondering, if I've read the book and I want more, are these labs the best way to go deeper?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, although they weren't necessarily designed as a sort of a definite output from the book, they do map and they do correlate to a lot of the book's teaching. There is one lab that's even called a Transformational HR Lab. And what it is really is, how do these 4 zones work for us? That's pretty much what we've done in a lab. So, yeah, you can kind of get an experimental viewpoint from it where you don't have to commit too deeply. You can just see if there's the initial spark of something that would form part of your people strategy going forward.
So tell me, where can we all go to learn more about you, about your company and your services in these labs?
Thank you. So the website is pthr.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter if you want to find me. And as you found, Jennifer, you can search for me on YouTube too. There's quite a lot of me talking about some of this.
Yep. For sure.
We're not that difficult to find, and we are quite modest, so we don't do any sort of salesy stuff. But we do put out quite a lot of content. So we write a lot and we share what's going on in our worlds.
That's wonderful. And for our followers, don't forget that we do all the hard work for you. We've listened back to this interview to provide you with a fantastic guide to the episode. So, of course, links to people in Transformational HR Limited's website, as well as where you can get the new edition of Transformational HR, How Human Resources Can Create Value and Impact Business Strategy, will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that guide today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. But Perry, right now it is time for our lightning round. I hope you're ready for some quick thinking. These are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Oh, yes. Been looking forward to this.
Oh, very good. All right. So our topic, Showdown, which is our first question always. In this episode, we've been talking about transforming human resources. So in your opinion, Perry, which of these transformations is more inspirational? The transformation of a caterpillar to a butterfly, or Optimus Prime's transformation from a classic Peterbilt truck into a heroic robot?
I guess my heart wants to say the butterfly, but my head says I still cannot get over how amazing Optimus Prime's transformation is, and I'm a bit of a tech geek, so I'll go with the hardware on that one.
All right, I'm with you on that one. I'll go with that. So tell me, what is the best book that you've read recently?
Now, this was one written about self-managed organisations in Sweden, and it's called Moose Heads on the Table, written by Lisa Gill and Karen Tenelius. And the reason I like it so much is we might know Moose Heads on the Table as the elephant in the room. It's how you table all those things nobody wants to talk about. It's a terrific book. Yeah.
Oh, sounds great. So what's your favorite thing about working as an HR consultant?
I loved this question and I thought long and hard about it actually, and I think it's 2 things here. It's the science and the art when people come together to do something better than themselves. I can't believe people in HR don't sense that almost every day, that they're part of the orchestration of that science-based artfulness of people doing something bigger than themselves.
Oh, I love that. All right. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So I think, again, I'll go back to the concept of impact, actually. I can remember somebody saying it's not how many hours you put in, it's the impact you have in the time you have. And that really stuck with me. I'm like, wow, it could just be a 5-minute coaching conversation, but it can have so much impact. So yeah, concentrate on the impact, not on the hours.
Yeah, I think that's particularly true in HR for sure. So tell me who or what inspires you.
It will sound like a bit of a cliche, but I'm going to say the team that I'm working with now, because my goodness me, I've never come across a team that are more committed, adaptable, and so on point with the mission that we have to try and create better business for a better world, so people flourish in their work. So I'm going to give the team a shout. They inspire me quite literally every hour.
Nice. Love that. Perry, this has been a truly exhilarating discussion. I can't thank you enough for talking with me today.
Super questions, Jennifer. Enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
And if you're listening, I want to let you know how much we appreciate you. Don't forget to grab the companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. And we're always looking for great voices for the show. So if there's a voice you'd like to hear on Project HR, please email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. Of course, be sure to subscribe to Project HR so you never miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you'd give Project HR a handful of stars wherever you get your content. Thanks for joining me. Let's make it a great day at work.